I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. My name is Adam, and for the first 12 years, my marriage felt like the kind of success you only hear about in movies. Leah and I shared dreams, celebrated each other's achievements, and lived what seemed to be a perfectly ordinary, happy life. I ran a small business that did well enough to give us a comfortable lifestyle, and Leah's career as a nurse seemed to bring her both pride and satisfaction. Together, we enjoyed our routines and planned for a long, happy future. Or so I thought. In hindsight, I can't believe how naive I was. I trusted her completely, believing every word about her late nights and long shifts at the hospital. She had convinced me that her job required sacrifices and missed dinners. At first, I was proud of her dedication, seeing it as part of the strong, ambitious woman I had fallen in love with. But lately, there was a feeling I couldn't quite shake, a sense that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. It was small things at first. Leah seemed more distant, and whenever I tried to talk to her, she seemed distracted, eyes glazed over. She would smile and nod, but it was like she wasn't really there. I would ask her if everything was all right, and she'd shrug it off, claiming she was just tired or stressed from work. Nights at the hospital can get crazy, she'd say. And like an idiot, I'd accept it without question. I wanted to believe her, to trust her, because that's what a good husband does, right? But eventually, those small things began to add up. One Saturday morning, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee and watching Leah pack for yet another weekend conference. It seemed like these work trips were becoming more frequent. Another conference, huh? I asked casually, trying to keep my tone light. Yeah, they just sprung this one on me last minute, she replied without meeting my eyes, stuffing clothes into her suitcase with a bit too much force. It's only for the weekend. I'll be back Sunday night. I nodded, forcing a smile, but something in her voice, a certain tension, put me on edge. Maybe it was the way she avoided eye contact or the odd way she seemed hurried and frazzled. My gut twisted, but I told myself it was nothing. I was just overthinking it, letting suspicion creep in where it didn't belong. That same day, after Leah left, I decided to ignore the nagging feeling and distract myself by cleaning the house. It was supposed to be therapeutic, my way of dealing with my anxiety. But when I picked up her laundry, a small, unassuming item fell from her pocket, a hotel key card with the name of a place that wasn't in the city she claimed to be visiting. My pulse quickened as I stared at the key card in my hand. This wasn't proof of anything, I told myself, but still, it nagged at me. The following week, curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't let it go, so I tried to reassure myself by rationalizing every strange thing I'd noticed. Maybe the key card was an old one, something she forgot about. But there were too many unanswered questions, and they all seemed to orbit around one thought I was afraid to confront: was Leah lying to me? My suspicions grew, and so did my determination to find the truth. So, one night, when Leah went to bed early claiming to be exhausted, I seized the opportunity. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, unlocked and tempting. It was wrong, I knew it was a violation of trust, but I needed to know. I tapped her messages, my heart pounding. And there it was. A text thread with someone named Rick. It was casual enough at first, innocent exchanges about work and life, small talk. But as I scrolled further, the texts took a different tone. My stomach dropped as I read his words, "Can't wait to see you again," and her reply, "I missed you too. Looking forward to this weekend." My heart hammered, my breathing shallow. This was more than a work relationship, it was an affair. I stood there, feeling a wave of nausea. Part of me wanted to burst into the bedroom, confront her with the messages, and demand an explanation. But something held me back. I knew that if I confronted her now, it would lead to a fight, maybe even a breakdown of our entire marriage. And yet, I couldn't ignore it. I had to be sure. I had to gather proof. For the next few days, I was a man possessed. I found myself tracking her credit card transactions and noticing charges for hotels, dinners at fancy restaurants, and reservations in cities that didn't match her work trips. Each new piece of evidence was like a knife twisting in my gut, confirming what I had hoped wasn't true. Leah was leading a double life right under my nose. Still, I kept my composure around her. I smiled when she spoke, laughed at her jokes, and played the part of the oblivious husband. All the while, I was planning my next move. I knew that I couldn't simply confront her. She would deny it, twist the story, or worse, turn it on me and claim I was the one overreacting. I'd read enough stories to know how that went. One evening, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at her packed suitcase as she got ready for another work trip. The sight of it filled me with a grim resolve. I was done being the fool. I couldn't stop thinking about Leah's betrayal, replaying it in my mind like a film reel stuck on loop. Every time I looked at her, the weight of her lies pressed down on me, suffocating and thick. But I was done being the fool, done pretending that I was too naive to notice the subtle hints or the way she had been carefully erasing traces of her double life. For the first time, I saw her clearly. My marriage wasn't just fraying, it had already torn, leaving me with a wife who had chosen someone else, and a future I had to rebuild from scratch. I knew I needed to be smart about my next move. If I wanted out, I had to make sure it was on my terms. I wanted the house, our savings, and a clean split. But most of all, I wanted her to feel the same kind of betrayal I felt. So, I started planning my revenge, slowly and methodically. It began with a visit to my lawyer, a quick consultation to lay out my options. If Leah thought she'd blindsided me, she was in for a rude awakening. With a no-fault divorce, I'd be entitled to a fair split of everything we owned. But that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal, a lesson she wouldn't forget. The hardest part was pretending. I had to act as if everything was normal, as though I were still the oblivious husband she had come to count on. Every morning, I forced myself to smile, to share meals with her, and to engage in small talk about work and family. I had to fight every instinct to confront her, every urge to make a cutting remark or betray my anger. It was the most excruciating act of self-control I'd ever known, but I held firm. One Friday night, Leah had just left for another business trip. This time, I was ready. I had hired a private investigator, a quiet, unassuming man with a knack for discretion. He'd been tracking her movements for a week, gathering information I could use. Every night after Leah left, he'd send me updates, photos, and information on her hotel bookings. My pulse quickened with each new piece of evidence. It was strangely satisfying to see her world from the outside, to understand the life she thought she was keeping hidden. She had become a stranger, a character in a story where I was both spectator and director. By the time she came back on Sunday, I was ready with a file full of evidence, more than enough to confirm every suspicion. On Monday morning, I received a call from my lawyer. He had processed the divorce papers, and they were ready for Leah's signature. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. And then, as if the universe wanted to sweeten my revenge, Leah handed me the perfect opportunity on a silver platter. She had mentioned she was planning a weekend getaway with her friend, Melissa. In reality, I knew she was going to be with Rick. But instead of stopping her, I encouraged the trip, pretending to be the supportive husband, even suggesting she take my car since it had better mileage. She looked surprised at first, a bit suspicious even, but eventually, she accepted the offer. As soon as Leah left, I put my plan into action. With the help of my investigator, I tracked her location in real time. I watched her drive to a luxury resort 3 hours away, a place we had once talked about visiting together but never did. It stung to know that she was making memories there with someone else, but I pushed the feeling down. I was already one step ahead. While she was gone, I changed the locks on the house. I'd already arranged with the bank to freeze our joint accounts, leaving her without access to the money she'd been siphoning off for her secret escapades. And just to make sure the message was loud and clear, I packed up every trace of her belongings, carefully boxing them up and setting them in the garage. But that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the depth of her betrayal. So, I went through our digital files, printing out pictures of our wedding day, vacation snapshots, and memories that I knew would cut deep. I placed them in an envelope on the kitchen counter, a silent reminder of everything she had destroyed. And, at the bottom of the stack, I included copies of the photos from the private investigator, her and Rick, hand in hand, sharing stolen kisses in lobbies and cafes, oblivious to the camera. Sunday night arrived, and I sat in the living room, waiting. I didn't know exactly when she'd be home, but I wanted to be there when she walked through the door. I wanted her to see the expression on my face, to understand that I was no longer the fool she had taken me for. At around 10 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of her footsteps approaching the door. She fumbled with her keys, trying to unlock it, but the new lock held firm. A few moments later, her phone buzzed with my message, "Check the garage." I watched through the window as she stormed over, fury and confusion etched across her face. When she saw her boxes stacked neatly in the garage, she froze, and her expression shifted from anger to shock. Her phone rang seconds later, and I answered. "Adam?" Her voice was thick with confusion. "What's going on?" "I think you already know, Leah," I replied, my tone calm and steady. "You can come inside to talk. The back door's open." The sound of her footsteps was brisk as she walked around the house and into the kitchen, where she stopped dead in her tracks. Her gaze fell on the envelope waiting on the counter, and for a split second, her mask slipped. I saw the fear in her eyes, the dawning realization of what she had lost. She opened the envelope, leafing through the photos, her hands shaking. "You had no right to do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No right?" I asked, my voice cold. "No right to know the truth about my wife? About my marriage?" "Adam, please, let me explain." "I think I've heard enough explanations, Leah. I've got the whole story right here." I gestured to the photos, letting the silence stretch between us. Her eyes welled up, but I felt nothing. I watched her cry, listened to her apologies and half-baked excuses, but the anger I had once felt had given way to something colder. I was free, and Leah was left standing in the ruins of the life she had tried to build on lies. I picked up the divorce papers and slid them across the counter toward her. "Sign these," I said, my voice even. "I think you'll find that everything's in order. You'll get what's fair, but that's all." "Adam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please. Can't we work through this? I made a mistake, but I love you. You loved me. If this is love, Leah, then I'd hate to see what betrayal looks like." I shook my head, fighting the urge to laugh. "You didn't just betray me, you killed everything we had. And now you have to live with that." I watched her crumble, her pleas falling on deaf ears. She signed the papers, her movement stiff and resigned, knowing she had lost. I watched as she gathered her things, her shoulders slumped and defeated. After Leah walked out that night, I sat in the stillness of our home, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The quiet was oppressive, yet strangely peaceful, as if the house itself was finally exhaling. I could almost feel the walls unclench, free of the tension that had seeped into every corner over the past few months. I should have felt relieved, but a deeper sadness settled in, a kind of mourning for the life I thought I had, the life Leah had taken from me without a second thought. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and decisions. My lawyer had finalized the divorce proceedings swiftly, making it one of the quickest divorces he'd ever handled. Leah and I exchanged only brief, icy messages to sort out any remaining details. She moved in with her sister temporarily, and we kept our distance, like two strangers who happened to share a past. The news spread quickly through our circle of friends and family. Some people reached out with condolences, offering words of encouragement or shared outrage. Others kept their distance, unsure of what to say. I quickly learned who my real friends were. Some of Leah's friends tried to convince me to hear her out, as if there was anything left to say. I ignored them, focusing instead on closing this chapter and moving on. One evening, as I was boxing up the last remnants of her things to drop off at her sister's, I received an unexpected message from Leah. "Can we meet? Just for a little while?" My first instinct was to ignore it, but something in me, a residual curiosity or maybe the desire for a sense of finality, made me agree. We arranged to meet at a quiet park halfway between our old home and her sister's place. When I arrived, Leah was already sitting on a bench, looking more fragile than I remembered. Her face was pale, drawn, as though she hadn't been sleeping. The sight stirred something in me, but I quickly pushed it down. I couldn't afford to feel sympathy for her now. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. I wanted to say I'm sorry, Adam." I nodded but said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel the weight of every moment, to let the reality sink in. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, her voice cracking. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry. I never thought things would turn out this way." "And yet, here we are," I replied, my voice calm but distant. "You didn't think things would turn out this way, Leah? Or you didn't care?" She winced, and for a second, I saw the guilt flash across her face. "I cared. I was stupid, Adam. I got lost. I let myself believe that what I was doing wasn't as bad as it was." I shook my head, scoffing at her excuses. "Lost? You didn't get lost, Leah. You made choices, deliberate choices. You chose him over me. And now you're here, sitting across from me, asking for some sort of absolution. Why?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt the stirrings of pity. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe because I hate myself for it. Maybe because I still love you, and I wanted you to know that, even if it doesn't matter." I let her words hang in the air, wondering if any of it was true. Did she love me? Or did she just miss the stability, the comfort, the familiarity that I had provided for so long? I knew, deep down, that it didn't matter anymore. Her version of love had become irrelevant to me, tainted by her betrayal. "I've moved on, Leah," I said finally, my tone steady and resolute. "What you did destroyed any chance we had. And maybe I'll never understand why, but that's not my problem anymore." She nodded slowly, wiping away a tear. "I guess I just hoped. I don't know. I just needed to see you one last time, to say goodbye properly." I stood up, feeling a strange weight lift as I looked down at her. "Goodbye, Leah." With that, I walked away, leaving her sitting alone on the bench. I didn't look back. I couldn't. This was my chance to close the door for good, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back. The following months were a lesson in rebuilding, a mix of painful self-reflection and the slow but steady act of moving forward. I focused on my business, pouring myself into work in a way I hadn't in years. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, and, as time went on, I even started dating again. It wasn't easy to open up after everything, but I realized that life had more to offer than the betrayal I'd been left with. One evening, several months after my last meeting with Leah, I got a message from a mutual friend. "You won't believe what happened with Leah." Curiosity got the better of me, and I called him immediately. He told me that Rick, the man Leah had thrown everything away for, had dumped her. Apparently, he had been stringing her along, never really committing. According to our friend, Leah had been devastated, blindsided by the man she thought she'd chosen over me. She was facing a life that was rapidly unraveling, just like the one she had so carelessly destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man she had sacrificed everything for, the one she had chosen to betray me with, had done exactly the same to her. And though I knew it was petty, a dark sense of satisfaction crept in. There was a justice in it, a twisted poetry that I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, Leah tried to reach out to me again, leaving voice messages, emails, even sending letters. Each message grew more desperate, full of apologies and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed she had changed, that losing Rick had made her realize how badly she'd hurt me. But I didn't respond. Not once. I had finally found peace, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back into her chaotic orbit. I kept a single letter from her, though. The last one she sent. In it, she poured out every regret, every ounce of sorrow and guilt she claimed to feel. She confessed to every lie, every moment of deception, and ended with a simple line: "I'll always regret what I did, and I'll never stop loving you. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." But forgiveness was a gift I was no longer willing to give. I put the letter away, a final memento of the life I had left behind, and chose to live my life on my own terms. Months passed, and life settled into a steady rhythm. I was finally starting to feel like myself again, almost forgetting the man I had been in the marriage. I'd filled my time with work, the gym, new hobbies, and even a few short-lived relationships. I was content, and the anger that had once simmered beneath the surface had given way to a quiet acceptance. I'd moved on, or so I thought. One Friday night, I returned home late from a friend's housewarming party. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed an envelope slipped under the door, stark and white against the dark floor. My name was scrawled on the front in Leah's unmistakable handwriting. I hadn't heard from her in over a month, ever since she'd sent that last letter full of regrets and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I thought I'd put it all behind me, that I was done with her. But seeing her handwriting again jolted me, bringing back memories I thought I'd buried. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore the envelope open and pulled out the letter inside. The tone was different this time, not pleading or apologetic. It was cold, almost businesslike. The letter was brief, a mere 3 sentences. "Adam, I found something that belongs to you. Meet me at our spot at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Please, it's important." The first thing that hit me was the strangeness of her wording. Our spot. Leah and I hadn't shared many sentimental traditions, but I knew exactly what she meant. Early in our marriage, we'd found a secluded little park outside of town, with a bench that overlooked the lake. We had gone there when we wanted to escape the world, to be alone with each other. For her to bring it up now, after everything that had happened, felt like a cruel twist of fate. I considered ignoring it, tearing up the letter and leaving it all in the past. But the phrase, "I found something that belongs to you," gnawed at me. Despite myself, I couldn't let it go. Against my better judgment, I decided I'd go. The next evening, as the sun began to set, I drove to the park. The air was cool, the sky painted in deep hues of orange and pink. When I arrived, Leah was already there, sitting on the bench, her head bowed. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and there was a heaviness in her expression that I hadn't seen before. "Adam," she greeted softly, her voice strained. "Thanks for coming." "I almost didn't," I replied, standing a few feet away, unsure of what to expect. "What is it that you found?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands, which clutched a small, worn notebook. It was a simple, leather-bound book that looked like it had seen years of use. She extended it to me, her hand trembling slightly. This is yours," she said, barely meeting my gaze. Confused, I took the notebook from her and opened it. Inside, I found pages filled with handwriting, my handwriting. I recognized it instantly. This was my journal, one I'd kept during the first few years of our marriage. I'd written in it regularly back then, documenting my thoughts, dreams, and the love I felt for Leah. I hadn't seen it in years and thought I'd lost it somewhere along the way. Where did you find this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I took it, she admitted, swallowing hard. Years ago. I don't even know why. I think I wanted to know how you really felt about me, what you were thinking. I knew it was wrong, but I kept it. The revelation stunned me. She had stolen something deeply personal, something private. The betrayal felt fresh, like a reopened wound. But there was something else that caught my attention. Flipping through the pages, I noticed new writing at the back of the notebook, writing that wasn't mine. I turned to the last few pages, where Leah had scrawled messy, frantic entries in ink that had smudged from what looked like tears. My heart pounded as I read her words. I don't know why I'm doing this. I love him, but I feel empty. Why isn't this enough? Why can't I be happy with him? Maybe it's me, maybe I'm broken. Adam doesn't deserve this. He deserves so much more. I looked up at her, a mix of emotions swirling inside me, anger, sadness, and a bitter kind of understanding. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Because you need to know, Adam. You need to know that it wasn't just you, she said, her voice breaking. I've spent so much time trying to figure out why I did what I did, why I threw it all away. And I think I finally understand. I was never satisfied because I didn't deserve what you gave me. I was sabotaging my own happiness, ruining what we had because I didn't believe I was worthy of it. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, we both just sat there in silence, letting them settle between us. I felt a strange sense of closure, a finality I hadn't realized I needed. In her own twisted way, she was admitting the depth of her betrayal, acknowledging that the fault was hers alone. I wanted to hate you, Leah, I said finally, closing the notebook and handing it back to her. And for a while, I did. But I think I've come to a place where I can forgive you, not for you, but for me. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, seeming to understand. Thank you, Adam. I don't deserve it, but thank you. We parted ways that night without another word, both of us knowing it was truly the end. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed the weight of a burden I'd been carrying for far too long. Months later, as I was clearing out old boxes in my garage, I came across another envelope from Leah, one I hadn't noticed before. Curious, I opened it, finding a single letter inside. Her handwriting was steady, resolute. Adam, if you're reading this, then I've finally found peace. I wanted you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. I destroyed us, but I hope that somewhere down the road, you find someone who deserves the love you have to give. Thank you for everything. Goodbye. I felt a chill run through me, realizing what her words meant. She was gone, for good this time. Leah had taken her own life, ending her pain in the only way she thought was left to her. The news hit me like a tidal wave, washing over me in waves of sadness, regret, and confusion. I had wanted her out of my life, had wanted to move on, but I never imagined it would end this way. As I sat in the quiet of my garage, holding her final words, I understood that some ghosts never truly leave. In the end, forgiveness hadn't just been for me. It had been for both of us.